Welcome to the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center's virtual panel called Can We Talk? Featuring artist Sara Juli in support of her upcoming performances of Burnt Out Wife. I'm Annie Hoffman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Tequesta, the Miccosukee, and the Seminole people. This opportunity is brought to you with support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Office of the Mayor. Our program this evening will be recorded and made available with captions on our website at smdcac.org. Our panelists will be providing visual descriptions as they introduce themselves for those who are blind or have low vision. My visual description is I have pale white skin, chin length, straight blonde hair, I'm wearing glasses, a black patterned top, and I have a virtual background of the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center behind me. If you have any questions for our panel, please write them into the comments so that our panelists may answer them. I would now like to introduce our moderator, journalist Jordan Levin, who will introduce our distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. So my name is Jordan Levin. I'm a journalist, writer, and arts critic. I am a woman in late middle age with chin-length, curly, gray-brown hair. I have white skin. I'm wearing a dark green sweater, and behind me is a green and wooden wall. My pronouns are she, her. And at the moment I'm in Vermont, not in Miami as I usually am. And I acknowledge that Vermont is the traditional land of the Abenaki people. So our panelists are Sara Juli, an artist, wife and mother, I have to say it, and creator, theater creator and performer and of Burnt Out Wife and many other pieces. So she's a fabulous oversharer and a very funny woman, and we're going to benefit from her honesty and willingness to talk about her life as inspiration for this piece. We also have with us Dr. Nubia Santos, who is a mental health counselor and sex therapist here in Miami, and Dr. Victoria Burns, or Vicki, who is an associate professor of women's studies at Florida International University. So ladies, I will let you introduce yourselves. Nubia, can we start with you?
Of course. Hello, my name is Nubia Santos. I am a certified sex therapist and psychotherapist. I have olive skin, dark, long hair. I am wearing a black shirt with floral print, and behind me I have a white wall. My pronouns are he and, she and her. Thank you.
Victoria?
Hi, everybody. My name is Vicki Burns. Again, I'm a faculty member at the Center for Women and Gender Studies at FIU. And my visual description is that I have white skin and long, straight brown hair. I'm wearing glasses currently. I'm wearing a red shirt with a black blazer over it. And behind me is an off-white blank wall. My pronouns are she, her. And I'd also like just to take a moment to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous lands and that the territory that we now know as South Florida has been the traditional homelands of the Native nations, including the Tequesta, the Calusa, and today the sovereign homelands of the Seminole and Miccosukee.
And Sara, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sara Juli. I am a white-skinned woman with shoulder-length brown hair wearing a textured yellow top, and behind me is a picture of myself performing. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling in from the traditional lands of the Wabanaki people, also known as Portland, Maine. thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so Sara, it's good you were the last introduction because I'd like to start with you. Um, so what inspired you to make Burnt Out Wife? What was going on in your life and in your marriage that you decided to spend a really significant amount of time and artistic and personal energy in creating a piece about some really intimate details of your marriage, both emotionally and physically?
Yeah, I am a performance artist, and the way I navigate the world is through my art making, and I have a seamless fusion of movement and text and sound, audience interaction and humor and song. And I take very personal topics and bring them to the performance space as a way to sort of twofold, as a way to help me heal and reconcile whatever the topic is, and then also as a way to connect to audiences with the thinking that anything that's bothering me has to be bothering several other million people at the same time. So my repertoire, my body of work that I have been building for my career, which I'm 21 years into this professional craft, run concurrently with my life and rites of passages from my life. So pieces I was making in my 20s were different than what I was making in my 30s, and different now than what I'm making in my 40s. My big joke is I'm patiently waiting to make the menopause piece, but not there yet. So they run concurrently with my life. So I had just come off I was coming off the heels of a piece that I had made previously called Tense Vagina, an Actual Diagnosis, which was about postpartum depression and urinary incontinence, which of course is very personal and also shared by millions and millions of women who give birth, and it's just incredibly common, yet not so spoken about. So I knew I wanted to make a piece about my experience, knowing that my work would shed light on, and I do strategically use humor as a portal through which to access kind of deeper topics. So I had just made this piece that was about motherhood, and was really in the throes of motherhood. And then I kind of got out of the toddler years, what do they call it, like baby brain, when you can't really think straight because you have the littles. And then they got a little older, and I didn't have to think about them every waking second. And so I started to turn my attention to my marriage. I think one of those things when you're so consumed by motherhood and raising small people, and I have a day job and I make art, so there's just a lot that it was like, oh, when you finally settle down and stop and look around and thought, well, wait a minute, what's going on with my marriage? What's going on with my relationship? And so when I put a lens up to that, it wasn't where I wanted it to be by any stretch of the imagination, because we hadn't been working on it, and marriages don't just move right along without time and care and attention. So it was very important. It became clear that I needed to make my next piece about it.
And it was compounded. So Sara and I spoke earlier about the piece and about her life, and she and her husband met. They were both artists, and they met in New York. And as Sara, as you told me, you fell in love as artists. You were both engaged in the same field. And then you moved to Maine, and you got married, and you had kids, and now he has a business, and all of that insanely busy life that is so familiar to so many of us. I'm sorry, I'm not asking a question, but I'm struck by how familiar that situation is for so many people. I don't think we think of marriage as something we have to work on, but you're right. If we never pay attention to it at all, everybody will start to feel neglected. Um, Nubia, as a therapist, how often do you deal with this when you work with couples or when you work with families, that people look up and go, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Right. And how did I get here? Yes, of course. By the time people come to me, they have already reached very close to reaching full-blown burnout. Early on, when the signs of challenges were maybe somewhat evident, were not addressed because life gets in the way, whether it's children, it's your career, your work, your everyday, and you don't pay attention to small signs that can eventually accumulate and become critical. So yes, I see this all the time. So it starts with, so then, when you start your relationship, you're in the honeymoon stage that we all know. We only see things from a colored rose glass. And then the challenges come, you overlook. That's the time, like I said, to maybe find ways to work things through. We dismiss, we rationalize it, and then you start to feel the stress. And then the stress becomes more of like anxiety, where you are trying to avoid certain things. You're trying to cope in ways that oftentimes are maladaptive, are not functional, not helpful. Best word here. And so then you will start to develop symptoms, and you're triggering on each other reactions that are then reinforcing itself, reinforcing that cycle of anxiety, of stress. Eventually, this anxiety becomes chronic. And eventually it's so embedded that you becomes habitual, and that's the full burnout. It's just like any other type of burnout, if you will. I'm just generalizing a little bit. But the play was amazing, the way Sara depicted such just a problem that many couples go through. Yeah, but I don't know if I'm already going to tangent here, if I answered your question.
I wondered if you could give us, when you say we stress and then we become anxious, could you give us an example of some of the most common things that people stress about and then that they get anxious about? And this is a non-therapist question. I think most people sort of think stress and anxiety are more or less the same thing. It sounds like they're not. How are they different? Can you give us just one specific example?
Of course, yes, that's a good question. Just to clarify. So stress, we all stress. We are wired to stress, obviously. It's just a reaction when we find, when things become difficult, when we feel a bit of just lack of control, we're overloaded. So then we will feel the discomfort, we'll feel overloaded and overwhelmed a bit. So we have symptoms, and we all know what stress feels like to a degree. So that can happen, so stress would be not necessarily consistent. You can have it at certain times, could be contextual. Maybe you're stressed at work, you have too much work, but maybe sometimes your work is not so stressful. You feel like you get a handle of everything. You can be stressed driving home. Traffic is always stressful every time you drive home. Sundays are not so stressful, but anxiety is actually the just feeling stress all of the time, where part of your brain has triggered the fight or flight response. It's the survival mechanism that we all have, which is important for us to have that, so we can defend ourselves, we can run, we can fight, we can have a reaction to protect us. But when we have that mechanism turned on consistently, then we are in survival mode. So we are surviving our relationships, if we will, instead of existing in them. So it's not adaptive, right? Because we actually see our partners as predators. If you are part of our brain sees our partners as a predator. So when you're actually arguing with your partner, the fight or flight response is triggered, and your prefrontal cortex, which is your objective brain, the brain that takes you to school and allow for you to have a good conversation, make sound decisions, that part of your brain is compromised. Now you are in survival mode. So you are irrational and you just using all the mechanisms that you possibly can to defend yourself to survive this predator. And so the brain then sees your partner as the predator. So that's why people feel so disconnected during times of distress. And they say things that are very hurtful, do things that are hurtful, and then oftentimes regretting, how did I say that? How come I said that? How could you do that? How could you say that to me? That's because your brain just separated so the other as a what do you call it, opponent, right? So now I'm here defending myself from you. I'm surviving you in this situation. That makes sense. So going back to anxiety, it is just experiencing stress consistently to a point where physically now you are constantly responding to it. Your heart rate increases. You can't sleep. So there is a cycle that feeds thought, rumination, elicits a physiological response, also triggers sensations of other experiences that you've had that might be similar, that this new experience here might have triggered. Maybe times when you felt dismissed or abandoned or just attacked. So triggers those sensations from other experiences. Now you're bringing your past into your present, right? Sometimes you misinterpret something and here you are, using all the force that you can to defend yourself by attacking, right? Or just hiding and avoiding. And so when you're constantly feeling hypervigilant and feeling just a constant physical symptoms from the situation and viewing the situation in a negative way, that's anxiety. So you start avoiding fear. There's fears, there's avoidance. Anxiety and fear, very interchangeable.
Very closely linked. Thank you.
Yes.
So you know what I thought of, Sarah? I thought of a moment in your piece where you describe that your husband, when he would call you on the phone, he would talk to you as if you were a colleague. You called it transactional. You said my marriage had become transactional. And you describe he's giving you some instructions about something, and then he says, take care. And you go off on this hilarious fit about take care. I take care of the kids. I take care of the lunches. I take care of the sump pump. I take care of, I can't, all of it. The litany of things that we as women feel like we get stuck with in a relationship as mothers. I'm a mother, and you go like, why am I always the one to do everything for everybody that I live with? And they just assume I know where their underwear is and what they did with their books and everything. So it's astonishing to me that after so many years of feminism, women are still in these kinds of roles in marriage, in most marriages and most families. They take care of everything. And Vicki, I wondered if you could talk about that, because every time I think it's changed or it's changing, I read something or encounter something which amazes me at how little it has changed, including on vacation with my sisters and their kids right now.
It's a great question. Yeah, I think that, like you said, there are some key things that I'll mention that have gotten better, and then there's some things that have virtually remained unchanged. I think we all know that initially the institution of marriage was really founded on patriarchal ideals. It was transactional, as Sara had mentioned. At the time, it was about economics. It was about women being seen as property, and then decades and decades ago, it started to be something that was supposed to be about love. If you watch the movies, it's supposed to be about finding your soulmate, finding your best friend, and all of these expectations that this partner is going to fulfill all of these things that usually came from a lot of different people before, but now are all supposed to come from your partner. It's a lot of pressure, but I think that there are certain ways that women have gained a lot of agency and autonomy that has impacted some of the power dynamics within a marriage. So for example, we know that women are getting undergraduate and graduate degrees in more numbers than ever before. In some fields, they're getting them more than men are. We know women are waiting to have kids if they have them at all. Careers coming first. And some women are in more numbers aren't even marrying. And if they do, they're marrying later. We know women are initiating divorce far more often than men are. And so there is some kind of sense that women feel more autonomy than before. But the research still shows for heterosexual women in marriage, they're more stressed and they're more unhappy than their partners. Than their male partners. So something is still wrong. And I don't think we have enough time today for me to tell you what I think all those things are. But just a few. I think there's various systems within society that are still relatively unchanged, but I think a lot of it has to do with this concept, this term called heteronormativity. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but the term really essentially first it talks about how there's a problematic expectation that everyone is in a heterosexual relationship, that only men like women, only women like men. That's problematic because it's not true. But with that comes these gender norm expectations that are very narrow, very rigid. And queer scholars have been talking about this for a very long time, how these really binary ways of looking at men and women actually really hurt women far more than they hurt men. They hurt men too, but they hurt women in these very particular ways that we haven't gotten past. And so you can see that with childcare, and you can see that with domestic labor, and how women are still seen as primary caretakers, no matter all the strides that they've made. And both men and women see women as the primary caretakers. Women have internalized it too and feel that they have to in a lot of ways, or that they don't have a choice. But you also see it with things like pay inequality. You're still seeing women not making as much money as men are. So there's ways in which things have changed and ways in which things have not. I also think what you touched on, a lot of is also emotional labor. We don't talk about emotional labor a lot. Things like who's going to plan the birthday party, who's going to send all the holiday cards and all the holiday gifts. And this disproportionately falls on women. And I think that we haven't quite become comfortable with pushing the gender binary enough, pushing past the gender norms that really keep us all trapped, both men and women. So I think that is one reason why we're still struggling a little bit.
I have to, Sara, I want to come back to you, but I have to share a little rhyme. Roses are red, gender's performative. Valentine's Day is heteronormative. Anyways, Sara, so I saw you nodding a lot while Vicki was speaking. How much, for instance, in that take care segment in your piece, how much of that feeling of being overwhelmed by this role you found in yourself in, and I can imagine from your description of that wild scene with the chocolate cake before you got married in New York City, that you were a very different person, and then you found yourself to be when you were in Maine with a family. So how much of that was going on for you and propelled you to make this piece, Burnt Out Wife?
Yeah, I think that's something, that I still struggle with now. And that I know I'm not alone, and I really resonated with what both Dr. Burns and Dr. Santos said. So thank you both for your putting, intellectual discourse and research and science to my feelings, which is why it's nice that we're all together tonight to talk about it, because I think that is a struggle where I am somebody who is career driven, and as an artist, I make one-woman shows that I tour around the world. However, that isn't validated in our culture as much as one would want. So I have another job as a fundraising consultant, since my artistry doesn't fully pay the bills. So I have two full-time jobs, and I'm a mother of two children. And while being a mother is the greatest gift, it really is, my gosh, it's a lot of work, and it's thankless and tireless, and really resonating with the emotional labor of just how many details I think about. And so every day trying to reconcile all those parts of myself, and then also feeling these social pressures and burdens to somehow fit into some perfect ideal that, at the same time I also be thin. I don't know. So, it's just like way too many things at once. And, so yeah, take care. So yeah, she the character gets really upset and kind of goes off on a tangent, which happens in real life all the time. So I definitely felt like in performance to be able to really have this angry rant, so many people could resonate with her just just losing it. And then I just to pivot for a quick second, because I wanted to make a comment on what Dr. Burns said about really interested about the gender binary. One of the and these heteronormative roles, one of the things I was attempting to do with the piece, but I think there's still room to kind of play and improve upon, is commenting on marriage as a construct, which is to say, why does it have to look this way? Like, look at this character who is, as Dr. Santos has defined, burnt out. Why do we have to run, and there could be a different piece about a male, a heteronormative male perspective and their burnout. So this is not this is not just unique to although we're talking about the heteronormative feminine experience right now, but where I was trying to, in the latter half of the piece, trying to create towards the end, trying to create a space to talk about, could marriage look different? Could there be different, could it be constructed? Could there be communication? Could there be different ways that it could be upheld? And it's sort of interesting insofar that I just really kind of touch on it and ask audiences to share some thoughts, but it's really quite, to Dr. Burns's point, like, there's a long way to go there. It's a very slow, very rigid conversation where most people just see marriage one way. Although I do think the queer community has been embracing an openness for many years that I think the heteronormative community actually could learn quite a bit from, if we could get to a place of communication and where we could listen and learn. And I think it's interesting that the persona also, she kind of has this sort of drag visualization about her. It's like pink over the top and heels and false eyelashes and crazy eye makeup. But I think anyway, there's just a lot of work to be done there that I was hoping that the piece could help open up a dialogue about.
You're talking about the what if section where you ask the audience
Yes.
what if questions. And in the recording that I saw, they don't really respond. I think it's maybe the situation, but it's also, marriage is one we think marriage is supposed to be, can only be one thing. And yet, I think, and I would like to hear Dr. Santos and Dr. Burns, I'd like to hear both your thoughts, but I think people have always found alternative families and ways of supporting each other, often out of necessity. I think people who have less money, working people, often have to have extended networks of family and friends because it's the only way they can survive. I know that immigrants depend on each other in very different ways than more established families here. For instance, I know I grew up on a commune, and I'm very grateful that I did, because there were a lot of women and a lot of people in that situation who gave me things that my parents were not able to give me. And so I wonder if, I mean, do either of you scholars speak to whether there are people are more open to or engaging in having other kinds of families, or thinking of families, or thinking of marriage in different ways? Nubia, Dr. Santos, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so if I understood the question correctly, if I see people who are willing to engage in different ways in their marriages.
Yes, or can we think of marriage as something other than one man and one woman forever?
Yes. Okay, sure. I see a lot of people who start to venture with, having another person to, sometimes it's as an attempt to fix the problem, which isn't, I wouldn't recommend. But a lot of times
I'm sorry to interrupt. When you mean another person to fix their problem, can you say
sure,
more specific about what you mean?
so a sexual partner.
Oh,
A sexual partner. So bringing that as a way to bring back the honeymoon stage, to make it more exciting, to take their marriage to another level, or they'll people just will engage in more support system, which is very helpful and necessary, because in the society in which we live, and both partners, for the most part, working, whether having a career or just working to survive, and everyone's super busy. Even the grandparents work, and their children are without children. People, we need our a clan. We need support, right? This is more natural of humans, and we lack a lot of support as a rule, and that's very helpful. And I make suggestions sometimes, for example, like a mother staying home with a young child, super tired. Say husband is working full-time, not able to give the support that she needs, as one example. And my idea is to bring about friends, and you take turns going to each other's homes and cook together, sharing the meals, have people alternating taking care of the children. So now you have support system, and diffusion of some responsibility, and having that cohesion, and just spending the time together. It's very pleasant for the woman who's staying home. And when the husband arrives, now you have less, right, to address. So now you can maybe have just focuses to whatever time there is left, that maybe you can spend a little time together. Maybe less time, more quality if possible, but we tend to need so much because we don't have enough of a lot of things that should be natural to humans. So I'm going on a tangent now, but I wonder if I answer your question.
Well, and Dr. Burns, I think it would be great for you to speak about this, but I've often thought, and this is part of feminist thinking, yes, that this country and this country's culture is really based on the nuclear family. And there's been a lot of criticism of the nuclear family over the years. It doesn't work for everybody, that it tends to isolate us. And for me, community has always been very central to the way I live my life. And I wonder, do you see evidence that people are thinking of family in a different way, or thinking outside the nuclear family, or outside the traditional marriage in terms of how they want to have a relationship?
Yeah, I think Nubia, you made a really good point, and essentially the idea that with that term that it takes a village, but we live in this really individualistic culture that is so antithetical to all the expectations that we have in it. If you look at, like you mentioned, collectivist cultures where you have extended relatives, you have neighbors, you have this whole community that are really helping you to raise a family. I mean, that really gives you a chance to have a second to check in with yourself, to say, what am I doing, right? To not be a robot, to be able to just check in with you and your partner. I think that's really important, to be able to have that kind of time to be able to check in. I think that women don't get that. I think that we sacrifice everything we've got and we come last, if at all. And so I think that that's part of the problem. In terms of non-traditional or families, I think that some people actually do within this culture a much better job about really having a bigger group of people to choose from. I think it's really hard too, because for some women, I mean, their actual salary, like their entire salary, can go towards paying for childcare. I mean, literally they work and their salary goes right to paying for childcare. And so, like, you really have this dichotomy of a choice. I mean, I might as well just stay home because all of my earnings are going to paying for childcare anyway. So I think that's an issue. But something Sara said earlier, I wanted to go back to, which is that we have a lot to learn from the queer community. And I think this also ties into, Jordan, what your question is too. I think we do. I think we have a lot to learn. I think that people in same-sex marriages are typically having much higher marital satisfaction when it comes to some of these issues about domestic labor. I mean, they do such a better job of dividing up tasks or chores, for example. I mean, the research shows that even just the communication about how to do that, things like, well, we don't really want to do any of these chores, but which ones most align with what you'd prefer to do? Like, how do we get you to do the things that you most prefer to do? I mean, just a conversation like that happens, and it really makes a big difference because people feel like they get to have some choice. And so I do think that we have a lot to learn. I think that, like you said, also with there's a lot of divorce, and although men are actually, they remarry at a much higher rate than women do. Women are, once they get divorced, they're kind of like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm good. I'm going to focus on me now. So when you do see a lot of those blended families, a lot of times it's men remarrying. But I think we really do have a lot that we can learn from the queer community and same-sex relationships, because they're generally seem to have higher relationship satisfaction.
Sara, was part of your situation that left you lifting your head and going, what happened to my marriage? Do you think part of it was because you moved to Maine and were living a more kind of a traditional life? If I'm wrong, please say so.
Yeah, I think so. We moved from New York City, where, my identity as an artist was a little more pronounced. And so then there was, a little more of a geographic isolation and social isolation, as I was making new friends, and then making new friends largely through the parents of my children's, the parents of my, how do I say that? The parents of my children's friends, the parents of my children's friends. Thank you. Words, but
Mom friends.
what?
Mom friends.
Mom
which
friends, yes, mom
never say
friends.
dad friends, mom friends.
Yeah, I have built a beautiful community here in Maine. You know, I've been living here for 8 years now. So, and I feel really embedded in the community and close with many strong, independent thinking women. But that did take many years to build, and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of commitment of, you know, do I want to stay home in my pajamas, or am I going to go out and make some new friends? So yeah, I think that played into it, but I also think it played into, I think the marriage kind of was where it was at because, as I said at the beginning, we weren't working on it. We're kind of just taking each other for granted, and also like ships passing. So because childcare is such a big part of raising children, it was like, oh, well, if you're going to watch the kids and I'm going to go get this done, and then when they're doing that, and then the other person can go. And so where was the quality time that we had together? And then when you do have time together, where was the settling yourself down, making sure you're not so angry, to Dr. Santos's point of like all this crazy kind of prefrontal cortex regress thinking, to really enjoy like 10 minutes. So say you only had 10 minutes with each other, I think in a healthy marriage, you know how to access that 10 minutes and make it really worthwhile. Is that touching? Is that keying in? How was your day? And really listening to your partner. You know, is that making dinner for your doing something that show your partner how you support them? And when we had those minutes, we were just throwing them away and just saying, I'm tired, you know, and you're tired and I'm tired. And I was really just more accessing kind of regressed anger than anything else. And so, you know, part of the research for the piece was going to marriage counseling, as I talk about in the piece. And of course, my biggest life hack was I actually received a grant for marriage counseling as research for the piece, which I still think is brilliant. And so I approached my husband and said, look, I got this grant that's going to cover our marriage counseling. I mean, you know, it was a portion, it just got us started. And he was like, oh, okay, well, it's a grant, so we should do it. And, but yay for me as also a grant writer in the million hats that we wear, was really learning about quality over quantity. You know, when you're raising two children, and he has his own business and I have two businesses, there's not going to be a lot of quantity, but let's not throw away the quality. And so through the marriage counseling and the building of the piece, I started to, and my husband and I started to look at quality, and make some shifts, which we've been able to then were further emphasized during a pandemic, when suddenly we were with each other a whole lot more than we'd ever been. So we actually were able to apply a lot of that quality and some quantity, since traveling was off the table in this past year and a half, and really take advantage of you know, this dreadful time to build a stronger marriage.
I'd like to add, if I may.
Yes, I was about to ask you.
Sorry. Thank you. So yeah, this was great. What I wanted to add is that the quality over quantity, you want to really be intentional about it. You want to set intentions, check in with each other, having that once at least a week time to check in, retrospect what's going on, right, over the week. What can we make it better? And if it is 15 minutes that you have in the evening, right, just a number, what are we doing with that? A lot of times we're just choosing to do other things instead. We say we don't have time for each other, but then we are on our phones all the time. I mean, we need to be aware of this and more intentional to put our phones away, right? Just make a point of putting it over there, not over here. And if I'm sitting next to you, then I'm going to talk to you. We don't have a lot of time, the children are young and they're all over the place, well, we can try to sit together or sit on the floor with the children and hang out that way. There's so many things you can do. But if you touch touch in and check in, if you make a point, be intentional about taking advantage of whatever 5 minutes you have, make a call, then it goes a long way. Just like a minute, 2 minutes, it goes a long way. That's you taking care of your marriage. But we don't do that. It's exactly what Sara was describing. It's just things just get in the way, and then you get frustrated and you're tired. Just like, okay, not now. But being intentional about it actually can keep you focused and in alignment with what you want, right, to attain. So it's setting daily intentions. Actually, it's easier to chew.
I want to, before we get to, we do have one question, but before we get to that, since we're in Miami, which is a really unique city, I wanted to talk a little bit about the role that the way that different cultures and different countries see marriage and see women in marriage, because in Miami, so many people come from Latin America. And often they come from countries with a more traditional view of women's role in marriage, women's role as mothers, and women in general. And that can play out in an infinitude of ways. But Dr. Santos and Dr. Burns, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and if you see in Miami things that issues or traits that are really unique to us because we're such an international and Latin American city.
I was letting Dr. Burns go, but I could go first. So you see the traditional gender role for sure, but I notice among the younger generation, there is a shift. I see a little bit. I don't know how much of that stands true. It's significant, I would say statistically, but my observations, let's put it this way, which is not statistically significant, it's what I see in my office. There is a shift with quite a bit. Young professionals who have children, a lot of them, some of them are planning to have kids. I see, males taking over domestic responsibility. There is expectation for that, but I also see the traditional ones where a lot of the responsibility falls on the women, and a lot of it comes with like, oh, she does it better, I don't know how to do this, oh, I mess up, or she doesn't like when I do it, she prefers to do it. I think a lot of it is also raising our boys to believe they cannot do certain things. I mean, I think there is a little bit of that, and that it's not for them to do it. They are insecure about doing it, insecure about changing the baby, insecure about a lot of things. So we need to consider that as well. And I tell my parents is that you're raising somebody else's partner, and you are choosing the partner for your child. So you have a lot of power here for the future, right? So just to be aware. I don't know if this was satisfactory an answer for you.
No, that's fine. Dr. Burns, you have a very different relationship to the public as a professor, so I imagine you see mostly young people. But is there anything you can say about the attitudes of your students or what you've studied,
Yeah, I was going to echo what Nubia said. So my students are very communicative. So at FIU, we're a Hispanic serving institution. I believe we have close to 70% of the students are identified as Latinx. And there's a real disconnect between them and their parents, and what they want for themselves and what their parents want for them. And I will tell you that I'll teach Introduction to Women's and Gender Studies. I'll have 300 students, and I'll have half of them be men. And when I was in college, there was like one guy maybe in women's and gender studies classes, right, if we were lucky. And so I do think there is this shift with the younger generation that they want more egalitarianism within their relationships. They want more equality. That there is a desire for that. The parents may not support it, but there is a desire for that that's there. And also something else that Nubia said that I really agree with, I think it starts really young. I think it's really we're focused a lot on raising our girls and empowering them and helping them to be leaders. And yes, that is what I do every day at my job, and I will do it forever. But I don't think that boys are getting quite enough of that in their own way, teaching them how to be nurturing, teaching them that caretaking is for boys, showing them, having them see if they have a heterosexual mom and dad, that there's equality there and that everyone's working hard and we're all doing this. I think that encouraging boys to break, I keep going back to the same thing, break past the heteronormativity, right? And there's not girl things or boy things. And I think that that's going to really make a big difference. But I do see a shift with this younger generation towards wanting something different.
We have thank you. That's inspiring to hear. We do have a question, which is a complicated one. What role does public policy play in the support dynamic? And so I'm a little unclear about what support dynamic means, but I'm going to guess childcare and education and economics for families not to have to work 3 jobs to survive. But can either of you, Dr. Santos or Dr. Burns, talk about that? Maybe is there something concrete, some concrete specific piece of public policy that you see making a really big difference in the lives of families and the lives of women in families?
I can jump in here. Yeah, there's a number of them. A few of them are even more pronounced since COVID. But the thing that pops up to me is pay equity and then parental leave, and those really go together sometimes. So for example, what happened when COVID hit is you saw a disproportionate amount of women drop out of the workforce to go take care of kids. And there was a number of reasons for that. We still see women as primary caretaker, that's in there. But I think some of the lack of support is also part of it. And so if you have 2 people that are working and one makes significantly less money than the other, and somebody's got to stay home, it's probably the person's going to leave the workforce, going to be the one who makes less money. It's typically the woman. And so because we don't quite have women being compensated in the same way that men are for the same job, you have it to be much more likely that women are going to be forced out if somebody has to leave because their work is not valued as much. You also see that with parental leave, and not just for when you have a baby, but even parental leave if there's someone who's sick in your family. You need to take time off. That would have been really helpful during COVID, right? To be able to have some parental leave in there to take care of your kids if they're sick, if they're not well, if they have to stay home, instead of forcing you to actually have to leave the workforce. It's so hard to go back into it. And so I know that there's this like Marxist feminist in me that says, we need to pay women for unpaid work, right? We need to pay them for taking care of their kids. We got to pay them for cleaning up around the house, or men if they want to do the same. I know that I heard about that when COVID was happening. I heard about people talking about that a little bit, but I think trying to find some kind of way to have some compensation or at least value for that unpaid work, I think that would help as well.
Dr. Santos, is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Sure. I mean, I totally agree with Vicki. And yes, I mean, it's as a support for the moms. Dads need to have the parental leave as well, because you need both, right? And for the child's emotional development, research shows that it's just so necessary for the parent to be part of the child, taking care of the infant, right? Having contact, having actually skin contact, and be part of it. And so that is necessary, I would say, a piece. Child care that is reliable. I mean, of course, we need to have that, but mothers, and even let's talk about single mothers as well, right? Having to choose between paying for childcare and going to work, having to take 2-3 jobs, and so the child can have childcare, so they can make some money to provide. I mean, it's just doesn't make any sense. And I think we could pull something together like that. I think as a nation, it would be possible for us if we decided to put some focus on this, and intention to change this, definitely.
All right. We're almost out of time. And so before we end, Sarah, I want to come back to you. And so you went through a difficult time with your husband, and then you spill it all in Burnt Out Wife. And what was the outcome of that? And was it good for you? Did it help? Did it help the two of you to communicate, in addition to having to spend a year and a half home together? But did making the peace help your marriage? Did it help you?
Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of art emulating life, emulating art. And so this character and this journey, which is an extended version of myself, she really starts to be able to see what her role is in improving her marriage, which is what happened in real life, which is I made the peace from a very angry place of really pointing my finger at my husband and saying, you don't do this and you don't do that. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight, and a lot of those inequalities. However, I wasn't at the same time looking at where I was falling short and where I was triggering my husband to be unhappy, and where I wasn't coming to the table. And so the marriage counselor said to me something very profound that has stayed with me in my work that I continue to do to preserve my marriage, which is, for every finger you point at someone or your partner, point 3 fingers back at yourself. And I think that has really resonated, which is, to really take a hard look in the mirror and see the selfishness with which I made a Burnt Out Wife. And there's kind of, I guess, some beauty in my practice that I really stayed committed to my feelings, and the piece is really a manifestation of that. However, having experienced a year and a half of togetherness and marriage counseling during a global pandemic, he and I have been doing the work together of what does it mean to communicate, and what does it mean to want to be married, and what does it mean to find quality over quantity. And I'm really proud of how our marriage has improved, and how the peace allowed me to see it, and how the lack of being able to perform gave me a little distance to look at it and think, ooh, interesting, Sara, have you really pointed 3 fingers back? So I love the piece. I love what I made, and I'm proud of it. And I've actually journeyed beyond it now. And it's a marker of time for me. And I'm no longer the character through which I now act and perform for audiences, as a way to help trigger and bring about dialogue for audiences in their own marriage. And my hope is through me telling my story through this character that others will want to take a look at their own relationships and long-term partnerships and ask similar questions.
So thank you, Sara, for sharing all of that, for sharing so much that's so personal about your life and your creative process. And as serious as we all have been, and as Sara has been, her piece has all of that, but it's also very funny, very engaging, and visually resplendent in pink and white.
Thank you.
It has a lot of style too. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, Dr. Nubia Santos. Thank you, Dr. Vicki Burns. Thank you, Juli. Thank you to the center for hosting this conversation. And we'll see you all at the theater.
Thank you so much to our moderator, Jordan Levin, and to our incredible panelists for participating in our conversation this evening. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Tickets for the in-person shows of Burnt Out Wife at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center in our Lab Theater on Friday, August 6th through Sunday, August 8th are available now. So please visit smdcac.org to get your tickets. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you and have a good night.